for their own safety. Anyways, I just wanted to...
To me, that's moving forward. And we will continue to learn. We have notes, and thank you very much.
One more question. Microphone 30.
Good afternoon, Chief Sastry, West Gracie Peak First Nation. First of all, I want to thank Red Cross for doing good work for our people. I've been watching you through the years here as I was a chief, and with Chief Meachus, number 7 microphone, I forget now. Anyhow, she does have a good idea on helping our elders and our people, which Red Cross approached us a couple years ago when Sabatoyak Cree Nation got evacuated. We accommodated, I don't know how many of their people at our camp up in Wellman Lake, which is available in the summertime for Red Cross to approach us anytime they want to use it. They had some people up there that were struggling with their addictions, and they were more comfortable there at our camp than they would have been in the hotel room, they said, which they didn't want to be in. So what I would recommend for all the chiefs here, if you do have accommodations for our people, maybe pass that information on to Red Cross, and that way it would make it a lot easier on them and on our people to have a good place to stay and have their own home-cooked meals like they use want. So that's what my recommendation would be, and I just want you guys to keep up the good work and work with our people. Miigwech.
Thank you very much. And that, I just want to point out, that's exactly what the disaster risk reduction program is all about, is mapping out the assets of the community so we know what those assets are and we can share that in times of need. So thank you very much.
So, Chiefs, if I may, I'm going to steal the mic from Ryan. I'm like a bingo caller. I like the microphone. Just, you know, to answer some of your questions, Chiefs, I just want to relay upon you my objective opinion. I agree with everything that was said. I want to remind Sean and the rest of our partners at the Red Cross that we did sign an MOU. We do have a concept on how we want to help our nations facilitate partnerships, and we need to figure out how to expedite that so that we can do those partnerships, because I would actually like to see our own communities be able to look after themselves, and Red Cross is committed to creating that relationship and that unique opportunity. So I want to introduce Merle Ballard. Merle, if you could stand up. Merle. She's in charge of our emergency response. She's doing engagement. I believe she's already been to at least 30 communities. She's traveled to more communities than me. I'm upset. No, I'm just kidding. But she's doing very good work. And I think Merle, we need to try and see if we can help facilitate some of the conversations, some of the discussions, because I know some of our communities are ready to go tomorrow. We could do this ourselves, but we have to help facilitate. I wanted to share a couple of quick stories. You know, the issue about food, well, two things. I'll tell you this story first. I haven't received one phone call this year. I didn't receive one phone call this year. And I'm just realizing that when I'm listening to our Red Cross people present. The year before, when our communities were being evacuated, I would get a call every second day. The province is not listening. The federal government's not listening. People weren't listening, and I don't know why it took the Grand Chief to have to phone somebody to get people to move. But when our relatives from Wasegamak were being evacuated, and you all have seen the pictures of the fire and the ashes dropping on women and children in boats, the province's response at that time was, Manitoba hydro assets are not at risk, so we're not mobilizing. Ridiculous. You know, I shared that with you before. It's ridiculous. That should never happen. You know, to the issue of food, again, our relatives from the Island Lake area, they all got evacuated, you know, late at night. So we go and check, and there was an elder there, and she was upset. She says, we're hungry. We've been traveling all day. We want to eat. We don't know what these little green balls are with this orange stuff and this cheese that's leaking. You know, it was brie cheese and olives. We don't know what this stuff is, you know. And then the next thing was when I went to the civic centers, the convention center, because that's where they had to go initially, was security had to come and get me. I was like, well, what's the problem? Well, there's these kids. And I was like, well, what's wrong? What are they doing? They're like, well, they're playing on the escalator, and there was about 100 kids on the escalator, right? We come from up north, we're from remote and isolated communities, and the little boy was, but the stairs are moving, it was like a Ferris wheel for him, I was like, but my boy, you can't play here. But that goes to your point, Chief, we all have different experiences, and we have to make sure that we're vigilant, so I want to, these comments that are being made, I want to make sure that our staff are pushing to make sure that we're facilitating these conversations that need to happen, because only we can look after ourselves, and that's true. I don't want to name drop, but I think they left already. But I just happened to be, they had to put some of our people in a soccer stadium or somewhere, and there was unfortunately, there was a Red Cross volunteer who made an offhand comment to the people who were there, and I didn't even have to say a word. I believe it was Kaylin. She was like, "You get out of here!" Like right away. Like it was dealt with right away. So I just wanted to commend them for their efforts and what they're doing as well. And we'll do our part to try and help facilitate these things so we can look after our people. Diego, say, thank you very much.
Is that Sean Feely guy still here? Hey, Sean. I notice you do some cultural activities as well. I want to see you dance powwow. Okay. We'll let you go for that today. We've done a lot of work related to the AMC. And now we want to go into another. As you know, we all have elections coming up, federal election, provincial election. And we thought that we would bring in some of the people in the province, those that want to work for people and create a government, and those that will have issues dealing with First Nations people. And we've compiled a list of people here, and some have confirmed, and I'm not sure who's in the room or who's able to make it. We have the Honorable Eileen Clark, the Minister of Indigenous and Northern Relations, attending on behalf of Premier Brian Pallister. I also heard that Eileen Clark wasn't going to be able to make it, but she had a representative, I believe. Are you here? Please identify yourself. I am just going to go down the list here. Wab Kinyu, we heard from this morning. If you'll maybe acknowledge the leader of the NDP party.
And Andrew and Jimmy, come up here for a second.
Sure. Okay, we have the honorable member from Point Douglas, the Honorable Bernadette Smith.
Sorry, Chiefs. I just want to make a quick comment before we have our guest. Following up on Chief, some of the comments this morning, Chief Meach's comments about the elections that are coming. I want to say for the record that when I reached out to all of the leaders of the political parties, they had all given me their commitment that they were going to be here. There was different candidates that had given their commitment that they were going to be here. Chiefs, these elections are very important, and I want you on your individual and personal levels to take an account on which individuals choose to value our input and what we have to say. And to those members who didn't take the opportunity to come here and sit with you, you know, maybe you need to relay that back to your community, and it's something we should contemplate, and we should try and help facilitate our participation in the coming elections. So I just wanted to say that for posterity, and I will invite our ally and our colleague up to the podium.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to say thank you to Wob for giving me his spot. I have my 2 grandchildren here, and they have to be back in the city by 4 o'clock to get to their mom. So thank you for that. I also just want to acknowledge the chiefs, the 63 First Nations, for inviting me here today. Very honored and privileged to come and talk to you guys about some of the things that our NDP government have been working on and also are committed to. So I'm Bernadette. I'm from, my family's from Duck Bay, Pine Creek area. I grew up in Winnipeg. I also was a kid in care. So I grew up in the north end of Winnipeg, single mom, 3 kids, and my mom was on welfare. I had my first child when I was 16, quit school, and I spent about 2 years in care. So I was in group homes. I visited Marymount. I actually ended up going back to school when I was 23, and I went back to Marymount to work there. So kind of full circle, wanted to give back to, you know, people who helped me in my life. So when I was elected and I met with Wob became the leader, and he asked me to be the critic for families. I was very honored because that's something that's very near and dear to my heart, especially around, you know, kids in care. I have 2 grandkids, you know, that are growing up in the city, and their mom is a single mom. My son and her are separated, and I didn't want my kids to ever have to go into care. So as soon as I was elected, I met with Wob. We talked at caucus, and I said I wanted to bring forth a bill that really looked at changing the way that our CFS system works, because 85% of our kids that are in care because of poverty. And our kids are being taken out of their homes because maybe their parent didn't have food, or maybe their parent needed some help with their parenting, or they were a single parent and, you know, their kid wasn't going to school. And that was me. I skipped school. That's why I ended up in care. I was running around with wrong people. I was exploited as a young girl. Same things we see today. So I wanted to make sure that that wasn't a grounds for kids being taken. So our caucus agreed upon that. We brought that bill, and thankfully we were able to get that bill passed in the House. So it was Bill 223, and basically it says that kids can't be apprehended due to poverty. We tried to bring another bill forward, Bill 230, and that bill basically said that just because you're a kid in care doesn't mean that you shouldn't have the right to parent. So we wanted to lift birth alerts. We did a lot of work with families whose children had been taken simply because they were kids in care. Unfortunately, that bill didn't get passed. And, you know, that's something that we're committed to continuing, because we know that that's still happening, and that's actually one of the recommendations that's in the missing and murdered inquiry, so one of the 231 recommendations. So our commitment to you is to ensure that those 231 recommendations are worked on. We will, Nahani and I, we went to Wob and we said, you know, this is something that we've been working on forever. As you know, I'm directly impacted, so something that's super close to my heart. And Wob said, absolutely, you know, and we wanted to work in collaboration with the communities as well, because we know my stepmom Brenda does a walk every year from Norway House to Winnipeg, and she's actually walked all the way to Ottawa. And as she was walking through those communities and sharing her story, she heard so many other family stories. And the commonalities across, the way people were treated, the racism, the way that our people's cases are investigated, the lack of resources that are put to it. And even when we go to tell the police that our loved one's missing, the messages that we're told, they're just out drinking, they'll show up, they're out there partying. And that should never be, what our families are told. And the lack of support too when families go to report their loved one missing. There's almost no support. You go into a police station, they give you an instant number, and they send you on your way. That has to change. Families need support. And we're committed to providing that support. So the 231 recommendations, we would pull together a committee of cabinet working with community and really look at delving into those 231 recommendations and looking at what can we do right now, what can we do in a month, what can we do in a year, and really look at implementing those and changing the way that things are done around our women. Because as the inquiry was going on 3 years almost, women still continued to go missing. Women still continued to be murdered. And, there's still not enough services for our women. So we're committed to working on those and working with all of you. I'll go back to our First Nations Child and Family Services. We also, recognize UNDRIP and, the jurisdiction that First Nations have. And I've said it all along that our kids deserve to be with their families in their communities. And that's one of the biggest reasons where we are today, is because our kids have been taken out of our communities. My mom was in residential school. I don't speak my language, didn't grow up knowing any of my traditions. And I didn't really know who I was, my identity, until I was like 23, till I went back to the Aboriginal Center, which is now Niganan. And I went into a program called Anishinaabe, and I started to learn about myself as an Indigenous woman and what that meant, and about our practices and our spirituality and our traditions. And that really helped to get me to where I am today, because I know who I am. And that's really what we need. We need to bring our kids home. And we are fully committed to working with all of you to make sure that our kids are in their communities, that whether they're taken care of by their parent, their grandparent, their auntie, their uncle, someone in their community that can take care of them. When my mom put me in care, I wasn't taken away from my mom. She needed help, and she got help. Someone came in and helped her, but it wasn't enough. And I ended up going into a group home, and that should never be the case. We should have the supports that we need to keep our kids in care. So our government, the NDP government, if we're elected, we will work with all of you to make sure that you have jurisdiction over your children and that your kids are staying in your community in collaboration with all of you. So Miigwech, I'm sorry I have to run, but I know there'll be questions. I am available on Facebook. Some people Facebook message me, or they can call me or email me. I'm more than open to answering any questions. And yeah, so thank you for your time and for doing this, and for really making, these First Nations issues a part of the political sphere, because we need our federal government talking about our First Nation issues. We need our provincial government as well. After all, we are the first peoples of this country, and we should be treated as such. So Miigwech.
Okay, thank you very much, Bernadette. We appreciate your schedule, family first, and it was very impressive that she could sit on that chair and have all her grandkids hanging off of her, and she didn't fall off. So I wish you all the best, and I want to commend you for coming here and spending some time with us. It's duly noted, and it's appreciated. So with that said, Chiefs, Ladies and gentlemen, members of our assembly, it is my honor to call upon the leader of the opposition, my colleague and friend, Wab Ganu.
Haumataki api, tansento temak, ebuju mina andino maganitok, ubarakut indigo, apichiwasa over there, donji, zamwasa, wache, and Masi. It gives me great pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to you today, and I greet you with a warm and heartfelt handshake. And I want to build off of what my sister colleague Bernadette Smith was saying earlier. Before I get into our campaign commitments and the issues we want to focus on, first of all, I want to say that I have a tremendous respect and value for the work that you all do as First Nations leaders. I respect and value you. And I also know that you have very, very difficult jobs. I know your phones are probably ringing even more than mine. I know that people are texting you all hours of the night, and in many cases you're responsible for providing for your people, for housing your people, and for creating a way of life for your people, a good quality of life that I would add to that. And so I have a tremendous amount of respect for the work that you do. And I view my role as a leader in the provincial sphere is to not make your lives any more difficult by putting up roadblocks or disputes or cutting programs that your people depend on. Rather, it is my goal as a leader of the Manitoba NDP to beat Brian Pallister on September 10th, to form the next government of Manitoba, and in the process, to help make your jobs of serving your people a whole lot easier. So I want to focus on three main areas as I campaign around the province: healthcare, jobs, and then an affordable quality of life. These are very important issues for us. With healthcare, we know that our traditional way of life, our traditional ways of life, tell us to live in concert with the medicines, with the food, with the water, and everything around us. But because of the impacts of colonization, too few of our people have access to those ways of life. And so we need a strong healthcare system now and for the future to provide for people who are in that position. Unfortunately, for the past number of years from Mr. Pallister, we have seen programs that First Nations and Indigenous communities depend on being cut. Life Flight Air Ambulances, which serve many northern communities. You know full well, Chief Monias, Chief Sinclair, actually they lost a community member while they were waiting for Life Flight. Services in the south, overcrowding, closures of emergency rooms, cuts to programs like physiotherapy, cuts to pharmacare coverage, and then the overall jurisdictional dispute, the tired attitude of the past that says the provincial government's responsibility ends where the reserves start. I guarantee you that if I am elected Premier, you will not hear the excuse that the province doesn't have responsibility to First Nations people, because a Manitoban is a Manitoban is a Manitoban. And so to implement that and to move beyond just trying to repair some of the damage that we've seen over the past few years, we will be rolling out specific campaign commitments. And these will include investing in services on First Nations and that serve First Nations. So over the course of August and that first week of September that this campaign is running, you will hear us make specific commitments in your communities to help your community members live better and to live healthier. The second major issue that I want to focus on is jobs and creating jobs right across the province, and even more than jobs, because I think many of us are familiar with programs that create a job for a summer or for 6 months or for maybe a year. I want careers in our communities. I want careers across Manitoba, meaning I want every person in this province to know the value and the dignity that comes from hard work. Sometimes when we're struggling in life and we're asking, who are we? Maybe it's not the most deepest answer, but if we can say, well, I work in recreation. I'm a janitor. I'm a plumber. Maybe that's not the most meaningful long-term answer, but at least it's a start. And so many of our people who are struggling with issues like addictions, issues in the families, if we were able to offer them a path to a career, It's not going to solve all the problems, but at least it's a start. And so that's something that I want to focus on as well. And when we talk about quality of life, this means dealing with the environmental challenge, the climate crisis, honoring our role as Indigenous men and women and Two-Spirit people as water protectors and as water carriers. But I also recognize full well that when we're designing an environmental policy, we can't just think about Winnipeg or the South. We have to think about the communities where somebody needs to drive a pickup truck 300 kilometers on a regular basis. And so my commitment to you is that we will balance the urgent action to address the climate crisis while taking care of the specific impacts that are felt in different regions across the province. And most of all, along the way, respecting First Nations' right to self-determination. So the three specific, those are the issues that I'm going to talk about throughout the whole campaign: healthcare, jobs, environment, and affordability. But when we get to the specific commitments on First Nations, again, I want to reiterate the commitments that we're making here today and that will be included in writing, in black and white, in our campaign platform, which is a fully costed platform document, I would add. So you heard Bernadette articulate two of them. We will name a cabinet committee to implement the recommendations of the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women. And importantly, it will not be me or men leading that committee. It will be Indigenous women like Bernadette Smith, who has the lived experience of having her sister go missing, who will be leading that process, and they will work with you as community leaders, and they will work with the community activists like the coalition. And so that's one of the commitments. Another one of the commitments that I'm making to you today is that we will implement the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, but we will do it in a very tangible way, beginning by recognizing the inherent right of Indigenous communities to raise our own children. And so that's what Bernadette was saying. We know that the CFS system needs change, but it doesn't just need change in the terms of a new funding formula or a reorganization. All those things can happen, but step one must be for the provincial government to admit that Indigenous communities have, always did, and always will be the greatest parents and people to raise our own children. And the third specific commitment that I'm making to you all today is that we will work towards resource revenue sharing. Resource revenue sharing beginning with a gaming fund, right? And what I mean by that is we will engage in negotiations with Indigenous leaders so that we can arrive at a shared deal to share gaming revenue, province-wide. Not just First Nations casinos, but province-wide, to ensure the job creation and economic development can be shared by First Nations and First Nations leaders like you right across the province. The reason why we want to do this, yes, we believe in jobs, and this will help to drive many jobs. Beyond that, however, we also know that the treaties are the unfinished business of our province and our country's history. In my understanding, and I have been very privileged to learn at the feet of many great elders and wisdom keepers, but my understanding is that a very important part of the treaties was the commitment to share the land and resources. And when I'm talking about resource revenue sharing and a gaming fund as the first step towards that, what I'm talking about is figuring out what does sharing the treaty vision with Manitoba and First Nations mean today in the modern context. And it's not something that we're going to come and prescribe and like hand you a done deal. It's something that we want to develop in concert with you, and this is based on conversations that we've had with the gaming table at AMC. I was handed a quick note here by the Grand Chief who wants me to address a specific issue, which is I think that there is some concern that if the current government continues on, that they will be coming for the tax exemption and some of the rebates on reserve, specifically cigarettes and gas. We're not going to touch that. you have our commitment that we're not going to touch that if we form government. And I would go a step further and share with you a piece of news that I think was overlooked this year. But we as the NDP team in the Manitoba legislature, we actually stopped the so-called social responsibility fee on cannabis from being implemented this year. We used a procedural tactic to delay it past the election. And so those of you who have interests in cannabis know full well that there's a bit of a background there in terms of this fee being applied on reserve. It's been a point of contention. We took the stand. That fee is not being applied this year on cannabis. And if we form government, before we do anything, we're going to come to a deal and an agreement with all of you. So there's many more things that I would like to say. There's many more things that I want to do in the future. It's going to be an intense campaign. You're going to hear all sorts of things about me. It's happening, it happens every time that I run for office, so it's going to happen again. But what I will tell you is that the way I intend to conduct myself is so that I can hold my head high, but also give the young people in our communities a reason to hold their heads high too. And so when I view some of your community members' Facebooks when you're all up for re-election, I know that you face some of these stresses and challenges at home, but I want to say that I understand what it's like and that I thank you and I value the service that you're doing for your communities and for all of us across the province. And the reason why I look at things that way is because how I was raised, and I was very lucky to grow up in a ceremonial circle, but whether you believe in our traditions, whether you follow the Bible, what have you, I think that you will all agree with what I'm about to say here. The way how I was raised by the elders is that they told me, we don't send our leaders to battle with arrows in their back. We don't send our leaders to battle with arrows in their back. And so that's why I'm here to offer you a hearty handshake, a warm and heartfelt handshake, and most of all, to promise a relationship that will see us work together to benefit all people in Manitoba and get Manitoba back to being a province for all of us. Miigwachke bizindaoyek, washte. Egose.
Me and Dennis are fighting over the microphone here. Thank you very much, Chiefs. I wanna thank Wab for coming and speaking with us. I wanna ask a few of the Chiefs if you have any specific questions that you would like to ask Wab. One question that I would like to be answered is, and I wanna thank the Chiefs. The Chiefs completely supported the position that we would not agree with the PUB. Hydro's request to the PUB to increase our hydro rates. As it stands, those hydro rates have been frozen in time, and we are continuing to pursue that from our position. And I would actually like to hear from Wab on what his position would be on that issue.
Well, thank you, Grand Chief. I think for all people in Manitoba, your hydro bills have gone up too much. And if you live in a hydro-impacted community, then you must feel even more offended than the average person who's seen your bill go up by $50 a month. You must be wondering, how is it that a publicly owned utility could have had such a devastating impact on your community, and then now you're still being asked to pay for it? I understand what it's like to come from a hydro-impacted community. Though I come from Treaty 3, my community was flooded out by Ontario Hydro, and we've lost our fishing. Our fishing's been impacted, and we've lost many of our traditional wild rice habitats. We can't harvest the rice anymore, which is a staple of our diet. So I understand the importance both of ensuring the affordability and of respecting the traditional ways of life and addressing the human impacts of hydro development across Manitoba. What we've seen over the past few years from the current government is that Mr. Pallister has interfered with the Crown corporations like Hydro too often and has made directions for them to do things like oppose the differential rate. We will take a much more transparent approach to dealing with hydro. And rather than trying to fight at the PUB to try and force these communities to pay more money, we would accept the PUB's order on the differential rate, and we would focus our energy with respect to hydro on addressing the human cost and addressing the impacts on First Nations. And hopefully, what we can do is to create a future here in Manitoba where everyone can be proud of Manitoba Hydro. Not just the people in the south, but also the people in the north, the people who have been impacted for generations. I do believe that we need to use Manitoba Hydro in order for us to meet the needs of the climate crisis, meaning we need renewable electricity, but we need to do it in a way that leaves nobody behind. Gone are the days where we can have communities in the north bear the impacts of hydro solo. And so hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight into the approach that we want to take. But certainly I think the overall message here is, as with our approach to CFS, when it comes to hydro, we would be looking to use the principles of the UN Declaration to guide any work that we do with First Nations.
And you'll be speaking with us, just adding to his notes. Any other questions, chiefs? Microphone number 9.
Chief David Munoz, Pemetsingmac, Cross Lake. We're one of those communities that are impacted by hydro. NTP in the past was also in charge of hydro. We've been through the Northern Flood Agreement. We haven't had full implementation of the Northern Flood Agreement, and that was by your government as well. And those are what changes are going to happen, because we're not just consumers, we're also owners, because we own the land there. That's our territory. And yet our people are having a high number of our people have their hydro rates are higher. We don't pay rent on the community, but the amount of money that they put into hydro is higher than the rent that you would pay off reserve. It's anywhere from up to $1,800 that they're still outstanding. And we continue to be in fights with the government of Manitoba over that. Not only just that, but also in terms of any permits that are being issued to companies to come and drill holes in our land, Mother Earth, and also to pollute our waters. And it's really hard to, when I think about in terms of who to promote or who, in the past for me, who would be really good in terms of a good candidate for the premier position, and also be the government. It's other provinces have revenue resource sharing, where they have where they would enjoy the royalties. We don't even get that. Instead, we're the one paying hydro for being on our lands, when it should be the other way around. And talking about resource revenue sharing, we're also exempt from paying tax. But if you go off reserve, you pay tax. Goods and services, GST, PST, all the other taxes, the hidden taxes that other people have to pay, we pay those things. Unless you have things delivered to the reserve, and sometimes those costs are higher than those taxes. So even those things need to change. Child welfare, 11,000 children in care. I worked in child welfare for a long time. The First Nations CFS agencies are not to blame for the children being in care. It's the mouth of the snake of CFS. That's the one that's the culprit. It's called anger. All Nations Coordinating Response. They're the ones taking those kids. The First Nations agencies can't take him home fast enough that they are coming in. There's hardly any money expended or allocated towards returning children. But there's a lot of money, millions of dollars are being allocated to take children into care. And talk about also in terms of our governments. You know, Bill C-92 was passed, but it's also that we have to make sure that Manitoba has to agree or to be a partner in our self-government. And for me, if you're not at the table, then I can ensure that we have self-government in CFS. You know, but it seems like we're being forced that Manitoba has to be a player or a partner in according to Bill C-92. But if you're not at the table, then we'll do our own, right? So what I'm thinking is that my question also is regarding to will Manitoba look at doing an enabling legislation as well to step aside and let us take care of our children on and off reserve? Egusane.
So yes, we would look at enabling legislation on the issue of child welfare. And that is what I'm saying when I say we want to implement the UN Declaration, which is like a high-level theory up here. But the way that I see we take that theory from being at that level and making a difference for families in communities and families in cities like Winnipeg is through enabling legislation. I heard the Bringing Our Children Home Act discussion earlier today, and I think that that's an approach that we want to support. What I would like to see the provincial government under our future government do is to continue to work towards providing the adequate resources to support families and to prevent apprehensions as much as possible, but to create space on the decision-making side where Indigenous communities will assume the jurisdiction and assume the control over the system. So I think the answer is yes on that question. To go a step further, I would like us to work towards the same sort of outcome on healthcare. I would like us to see a tripartite agreement or numerous tripartite agreements in Manitoba to ensure that there is greater Indigenous control over Indigenous healthcare in our province. And so perhaps starting with child welfare, we can create a model and we can proceed the same way in health. And that's essentially why I was sharing the idea of using a gaming fund to work towards resource revenue sharing. Resource revenue sharing as a whole is a massive topic. If we focus on one specific area first, which is gaming, sort out what is a share that makes sense for everybody and have that table come to some kind of agreement, then we can use that as a model, use that as a precedent, and then go forward to other areas and figure out what's fair. Yeah. Sonny.
Okay, thank you. If we can limit our questions to and statements to at least 3 minutes. We have Chief Hudson, Chief Batson, Councillor Wilson, I believe, and then Chief Meach is on standby. Number 30, please.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to ask the question. I guess you mentioned gaming, and we certainly like to set up shop in the city of Winnipeg. That is our traditional territory, Treaty Number 1, and we've been lobbying both governments, this current one and the previous, to see that and realize that. And you did comment about making changes in gaming, which is refreshing, but we'd like to see our facilities recognized and that openness to have that happen in the city of Winnipeg. Obviously, you're seeing today where through our treaty land entitlement, we are repatriating our lands, including in the city of Winnipeg, and the intention is to continue to move forward with that. And I guess I'm asking for a friend if you would be open to having a casino in the city of Winnipeg. That is First Nation owned. But also, a second question, you commented about environment and sustainability. And that's something that, we are promoting at Peguis in terms of our developments. We're doing geothermal, we're doing solar. And I know in the past, there has been developments in terms of utilizing more efficient and more environmental friendly ways in terms of hydro and hydro developments. I think we have the answers. I think we all have the answers. It's just a matter of agreeing to allow us to tap into the grid system here in Manitoba, because currently a lot of the development that is occurring is to look at exporting power and to send it south for future revenues. We'd like to save Manitoba Hydro the consumption in terms of coming up with our own ways, solar, you name it, in terms of being able to utilize our power within our communities, but also possibly exporting and providing that to hydro also, so they can further their goals as far as generating future revenues. So that's for another friend I'm asking that question.
All right. Thank you, Chief Hudson, and congratulations on your recent celebration for your urban reserve. So the first question, I did talk about having a table to negotiate revenue sharing on gaming. And I think that that's an important step based on what I heard from the other chiefs who are part of the gaming committee. Again, the issue that I'm looking to address there is that there are some communities who are well positioned to benefit from gaming. However, there's other communities in Manitoba, because of geography or because of other reasons, will not be able to benefit from gaming, and yet I believe that they should be able to share in some of the economic development. So that's the issue that I think I'm looking to address with that one. I think the current stumbling block, the stumbling block with the current government, and to be frank, the last government as well, is that there was a predetermined conclusion. So what you heard from Mr. Pallister was no way, no casino, right? And what I'm committing to as part of this table is that you won't get any predetermined conclusions from me. I'll be there, our cabinet, our staff will be there, we'll work with you, and we'll figure out the outcome that makes sense for your community, that makes sense for all of Manitoba. On the question of Manitoba Hydro, if I'm understanding correctly, sometimes Manitoba Hydro's policy or the law around the Manitoba Hydro Act stands in the way of local communities developing their own power and either selling it back to the grid or exporting. That's the issue that you're looking to have addressed. So I would like to see that. And one of the things that we're going to talk about in this campaign is, in order for us to deal with the environmental challenge and the climate challenge, is I do think Manitoba Hydro needs to evolve past just being a dam building company and towards being a renewable energy company. And so, apart from me not interfering with hydro and doing these political moves that you've seen over the past few years, I want to ensure that hydro is evolving past just being a dam building company and looking at alternative ways to generate electricity. If it means a geothermal project in your community, if it means a wind farm in Rolling River, if there's these other ways to generate power closer to where people live, then let's look at that. Let's find a way to do it. And I'd like to go even beyond that. And when we're doing installations of geothermal in a community like yours, or some of these other energy projects, let's create those jobs locally. Let's not bring people in, contractors in from out of province or out of country. Let's ensure that those good paying jobs benefit the local community. And so if we have to invest in a training program to ensure that community members are ready to do the installs, if we have to create a social enterprise to hire the people and channel the resources through, let's do that. But what I would like to see is for us to do these environmentally progressive policy steps, but also for us to create tons of good jobs for people in community like yours in the process. And not just communities like yours, people like communities in all of your communities right across Manitoba.
Chief Batson, mic 26. Yes, brief.
Hello, Chief Batson, Pine Creek First Nation. I have kind of a threefold question. It's all related to health. I come from a health background, so that's kind of where my concern lies. In regards to the opioid and meth crisis that we're currently experiencing across the province, what is your strategy for dealing with this? And also, I guess the other part of that is there is a lack of treatment facilities for people who are dealing with addiction issues. So what would be your platform on that? As well, dialysis spaces in rural centers. There's not enough spaces, as we know. I know there's been an expansion in some areas, but my community is serviced by Prairie Mountain Health. And so a lot of the patients would be going to either Dauphin or Swan River. And so there are more spaces definitely needed in those rural areas. As well, I think you did mention something about a health transformation process. What do you envision as far as being able to support that process moving forward, a health transformation for Indigenous people, and how to improve health services in Manitoba for Indigenous people? Miigwech.
Okay, I was scribbling quite a bit there during your question. So on the addictions crisis, the reason why I choose to use the term addictions crisis rather than meth crisis, which you often hear in the media, is the experts are telling me this is not a meth crisis, this is the same addictions crisis our communities have been facing for decades. It's just that there's a new substance of choice for many people. And I think if we start to talk about it in those terms, we begin to have a clearer idea of what the solutions need to be. There are immediate steps that we need to take, harm reduction, treatment, detox, steps like that. But because this is a long-term addictions crisis, we also need to ask, why are so many people in this province predisposed towards addictions? And what the experts are telling me on that side is addictions are caused by unresolved trauma. And then it makes a lot more sense why people in our communities struggle, whether it's been abuse or whether it's been the residential schools followed by the 60s scoop, followed by the CFS system, whether it's other challenges that they've faced in their lives. It does make sense that those who've experienced trauma and never had a healthy way to deal with it are more likely to suffer from addictions. So when we think about it in that way, not only do we need the immediate steps like harm reduction and detox, but we also need to address the root causes. And that is a much bigger discussion, and I'm committed to doing both. So on this side, yesterday we announced we would fund Main Street Projects approach, which is more than a year long, so that, you know, one of the things people tell me about meth is 28-day treatment is not enough to help somebody with meth. So the program we're looking at Main Street, detox immediately, longer-term treatment for a few months, and then transitional housing at the end, meaning you move somebody back into the community with supports so that they don't relapse, or they're less likely to relapse. Later in the campaign, we'll be talking about some of our other priorities on harm reduction and treatment, so I don't want to spell it all out now because we're holding back some of the announcements. But at the same time as we do those immediate steps, I also want to address the root causes, which are poverty, the CFS system, the institutionalization of young people in the criminal justice system, and then traumatic childhood experiences that people experience, whether it's abuse or whether it's, you know, an accident. People experience different traumas. So if we have a government that puts people back at the heart of decision making and asks, how can we ensure that every child in our province can have a childhood free of trauma, and then starts to make decisions in CFS and justice and education based on those, then I think that's going to be a huge part of the solution. In addition to mental health, we're going to add a ton more mental health services, not just in Winnipeg, but close to where people live across the province. So we need more mental health. And I believe that the response to opioids needs to be similar. You need immediate responses like Suboxone maintenance programs, but then you also need to address the root causes of poverty and mental health and CFS. In terms of dialysis in rural centers, again, I think that during the campaign, we're going to be talking about some of those specifics. I believe you'll be in the Dauphin constituency, so you can look to us to make some announcements in Dauphin during the campaign. And hopefully I can just get away with saying, you know, stay tuned for now, if you will. Because again, I don't want to do all of our platform commitments here today. And then in terms of the healthcare transformation, I think there's been a lot of good work. I'm biased. You guys, many of you know my mom, so I'm obviously biased of some of the great work that's been done on the health transformation. But also, it makes sense from the Indigenous perspective. What I would like to do over the coming years in Manitoba is to also take this conversation beyond the Indigenous community and get the average, everyday Manitoban to understand the importance of improving Indigenous health. And the argument there is as follows. Right now, if you go to HSC, 40% or more of the people in those beds on the wards are Indigenous people. And until we improve the health outcomes for Indigenous people, then everyone's health care in Manitoba will be suffering. On the flip side, if we improve the health of Indigenous people, and Indigenous folks are less likely to have to go to the ER, less likely to have to go to the hospital, then everyone in the province is going to have a better and stronger healthcare system. So in terms of health transformation, I'm paying close attention to the work that's being done, and I think that the role for the province in that process of health transformation is to show up and to be a good partner and to look towards a model perhaps similar to what they did in BC with FNHA, recognizing though that Manitoba's unique political and geographic constitution means that it's probably not going to be a province-wide table. It'll probably be more regional. Southern, Island Lake, Northern, as an example of one possible model. But again, it's not my role to impose that model. It's my role, if I get the great opportunity to serve as Premier, to show up as a partner and to jointly develop that model. Yes.
Okay, please limit the questions to short questions, brief questions. Microphone 24, Sam Wilson.
Good afternoon, Wab. It's nice to see you here. The only question I have is in regards to the safety of our Indigenous women within the city limits of Winnipeg. As we all know, it's pretty dangerous for an Indigenous woman to be walking around in the city of Winnipeg in this day and age. I'd like to know how you plan to address the behavior of some of our cab companies that are in the city of Winnipeg. We all follow social media and we all see and read of a lot of stories and watch the videos of a lot of our Indigenous girls that have been picked up and taken around for rides around blocks, and they're often dropped off scared and fearing for their lives. I'd like to know how you plan on handling those sorts of situations.
Well, I don't presume to know what it's like to feel unsafe as an Indigenous woman on the streets of Winnipeg. I can tell you that I take it very seriously when my wife tells me that she is afraid, or when my wife tells me that she thinks twice about calling a cab, or when her friends share those stories that they've experienced. And so I do respect that a lot. I think one of the challenges that we've encountered is that the provincial government, Mr. Pallister, handed down responsibility over the taxi cab board to the city of Winnipeg, right? And they did it because they wanted to open the door for Uber and Lyft to come to Manitoba. But in the process, what they've done is they've removed the tools from the hands of the provincial government to be able to directly moderate and deal with this industry, right? So I think the best way going forward, now that the city is the one that manages the cab companies in Winnipeg, is to have a good relationship with the mayor and to ensure that they're doing their job in terms of safety when it comes to the taxi industry. And I can tell you that unlike the current government, which is always having a fight with Bowman or Trudeau or whoever, I'll work with whoever's there. And I can work with Bowman. and I'll work with Bowman on this issue. What we need when it comes to meth is a coordinated strategy across the province and the city to ensure that the addictions issue gets dealt with. And I think that this issue requires a similar response, coordination, collaboration between the province and the city. Because the province has jurisdiction, but it's effectively handed it over to the city of Winnipeg, and so now the city of Winnipeg is a player in that space. What I would add to that is I think we also need to preserve space for organizations like AGA, Safe Rides, right? And, you know, Christine Bruce, I think, is doing amazing work along with others there. So we need to preserve the space for organizations like that, grassroots organizations who are working to keep communities safe. And I think the final thing that I would add, and this is based on, you know, having heard the Grand Chief's comments in the media on the issue, is I think we need to do all this in consultation. Indigenous communities, Indigenous leadership need to have a voice in these processes. And so I'd like to be able to work with everybody, and I'd like to come up with a solution that ensures that everyone's voices are heard, but at the end of the day ensures that Indigenous women feel safe and that they are free to live their lives as anyone else in our city would, as anyone else in our society would. And I do think part of it goes back to what Bernadette was committing to around that committee of cabinet implementing the recommendations, because you know as well as I do that some of those recommendations do deal with safe transportation for Indigenous women.
Thank you.
Microphone number 4, Chief Maches.
Baywatch. Thank you, Wab, for being here today. I don't know where to begin here. AMC, all these years, has never endorsed a political party. I really believe that needs to change. I raised this with the Chiefs Committee not that long ago. I'm very concerned, especially with the Premier's actions as it relates to Indigenous governments and Indigenous people. So I'm hoping that we can, I know we do have other Indigenous candidates that are running in, you know, for the Liberal Party and the Conservative government. But I really think it's time, AMC, you know, being a political body, we should be endorsing, well, NDP. That's my personal opinion. I voted NDP all my life. I started voting when I turned 18. My grandfather took me to the polls and said,